7 Viking habits that would shock any modern man, said the old one. Not laughing, not smiling, not even breathing hard from the climb. His cloak steamed in the windless cold, crusted with hoarfrost like bark. 7. And not one of them will save you here. The younger men did not answer. The wind had long since died. No birds above, no crunch of branch or hoof below. Only the creak of packed snow shifting beneath the timber sleds, and the low, hoarse exhale of the oxen, their eyes rimmed in icicles. Behind them, the forest loomed, white, silent, ancient, not with the silence of peace, but with the dreadful hush of a hunter drawing breath before the kill. Torgir, whose beard had frozen to the fur trim of his collar, shifted his weight. The cold had found his groin, climbed into his bones. His boots had stiffened where blood had crusted at the heel. His own, he guessed, from a cracked blister that now pulsed like a second heart with every step. They were 5 days north of the last stead, past the rivers that ran black in spring, past the hills with old barrows no one dared speak over, past the place where Askel's dogs had turned and refused to move, then howled all night beneath the moon as if something with long fingers scraped at their dreams. The Biamians had not attacked yet, not directly, not the way Norse warriors knew how to answer, with shield wall and axe, bone on bark, blood on snow. No, this was not that kind of war. This was the first lesson. 1. The Biamians' asymmetric superiority. The habits that made Norsemen strong in the south, bravery, boldness, the forward step into fire, meant death in the white forest. The Biamians taught it without words. First, it was the scouts, Vali and Eilif. Young, full of hunger, they went to find fresh water at dusk. Torgeir had heard their boots melt the crust as they walked downhill. He had heard them speaking softly. Then, nothing. No scream. No sign. When they went looking, all they found was a leather strip torn from Eilif's belt nailed to a birch tree. No tracks, just snow scuffed once, then pressed smooth again. Later that night, something whistled in the dark. A long, low note, rising like a woman's wail, then falling sharp, like a crow calling down judgment. It made the oxen cry out and lunge against their tethers. One broke free, ran blind into the forest. They heard it crash through ice. Then silence. No one fetched it. By the next morning, the men had bound their own ankles with cord in their sleep, for fear of rising and wandering off. Askel had carved runes into the snow with his fingernail beside the fire pit. When Torgeir asked why, Askel only stared at the tree line and whispered, "To let the gods know where to find my bones." That day, the forest thickened. Branches stooped under snow like old women. The trees grew too tight for sleds. They left them behind, took what they could carry. They made camp in silence. Torgeir sharpened his sayax beside a tree that had no bark on one side. Just raw pink wood, peeled smooth. Not by animal or axe, peeled in long strips the way you clean a deer. He said nothing. The old one, Snorri, who had seen winters before Harold Fairhair was born, muttered something about the Biamians moving like mist, knowing every fold in the land, where the frost stayed dry and where it swallowed whole. "They do not wear fur," he whispered. "They wear the white. Snowshoes of sinew and birch slats, cloaks made of woven ptarmigan feathers, faces smeared in clay and ash. They moved without sound, without heat, without shape." Torgeir's breath clouded in front of him as he listened. The men around the fire had started sleeping in turns, none longer than an hour. Then came the bones, set in a ring just beyond the firelight. Polished, bleached, each one human, a jaw with no teeth, a child's femur drilled through and strung with braided hair. a ribcage wired together with sinew, posed like a cradle, holding snow. No footprints near them, no sound of approach. Just there, after dark. Askell wept in his sleep. That night, it snowed without falling. The flakes drifted sideways, against the wind. A sign, the old man said. The Biamians had blessed the storm. Or perhaps they had made it. Torgir clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. In the morning, they found one of the guards hung upside down from a tree, not by rope. By his own sinews, pulled from under the skin and tied like cords. His lips had been sewn shut with bone needles. Beneath him, carved into the packed snow, was a word none of them knew. But they understood its meaning. 2. The psychological collapse of Viking warriors. It began with the eyes. Torgeir saw it in Ketil first. Eyes too wide, too still. The way a hawk looks before it strikes, but without a target. Just watching everything, watching nothing. He would not speak unless spoken to, and when he did, it was always about fire. Keep it burning. They hate the fire. He lit small torches in his beard, doused his gloves in pitch, slept with flame near his face, though it burned his lashes. Then it spread. Snorri carved his dreams into tree bark at dawn. So I will remember what I am. They had stopped eating meat. Every animal they caught had burst intestines, tainted. One hare had no eyes, just sockets packed with twigs. The stew made from it made 3 men bleed from the nose. No birds, no signs of life. Only the wind, and sometimes even that stopped. One night, Askell woke screaming, clutching his own chest. He said he saw a woman made of moss sit on his chest and chew the words out of his throat. She had no mouth, only hands, he sobbed. She fed me my own dreams. That morning his tongue was black. Snorri said nothing, just nodded. The forest wants silence. We brought too many names. They stopped speaking aloud, began using hand signs. Kept the fire low, barely coals, covered the flames with bone dust and ash. Then came the effigy, erected in the clearing, man-shaped, twisted from animal sinew, birch bark, and human teeth. Eyes painted with blood. A single Biamian rune burned into the chest, raw, exact, ritual. Ketil tried to burn it, but the wood hissed and would not catch. The smoke curled down instead of up, and his beard caught flame from the torch. He screamed, and something in the trees echoed it back, but backwards. Like the forest mocked the sound, but got it wrong. The old man said nothing now. His lips cracked with cold. He bled without notice. On the 6th night, they buried Snorri. His eyes had frozen open, fingers clenched as if holding something invisible. Perhaps the last breath, or perhaps a name he dared not speak. They did not build a cairn, only shoveled snow over his face and whispered no prayers. The wind would carry him, or the gods, or neither. Torgir sat by the fire and watched the coals shift like small cities falling. His fingers had gone white at the tips. He could not feel the knife when he held it. He began to think about the habits, the old ones, the ones they had been taught. How to build fire in sleet. How to kill a stag with one throw. How to sleep light and wake faster. How to listen for the gods in your gut. How to stare down your death until it blinked first. None of it mattered now. Not in the white. Not where even the trees held breath to listen. Behind him, someone whispered. Not in Norse. Something softer, rhythmic, like breath through reed flutes. When he turned, no one was there. Only the snow and tracks. Too small for a man, too wide for a child. And going forward, into the trees. The tracks led forward. Not in a straight line, not wandering either, but as if they followed something unseen, a rhythm, a pattern, wide at the ball of the foot, narrow at the heel, not human, not animal. Some of the men said they saw claws, but when they bent closer, the outlines softened into nothing, as if the snow itself had only briefly remembered a presence, then forgot. Torgir did not speak of what he saw in the center of the prints, a twist of dark red, like spilled elderberry juice, but thicker and still warm when touched. He wiped his glove on a pine and said nothing. The forest narrowed. Trunks leaned toward one another like old warriors speaking low. No birds, no wind. The air carried the stillness of breath held too long. Their steps slowed, not from exhaustion, but from the pull of something below, like walking on a frozen lake you know is hollow. They saw the first mummified guardian at dusk, set upright in a birch frame above ground, lashed to a cross of bones with braided hair and amber beads in the sockets where eyes had once lived. The flesh had not decayed. It had dried, cured like smoked meat, skin like old vellum, teeth still grinning, rings on the fingers, women's rings, Viking rings. No one touched it. Torgir moved past it sideways, not daring to show his back. As he passed, he felt warmth at his collar, a breath. He turned, nothing but snow. But the body had tilted, just slightly, as if listening. 3. The Byamian cultural mystery. That night they found the birch sanctuaries. Not huts, not temples, altars perhaps, made from branches bent into domes, lacquered with ice and resin. Inside each, another ancestor, upright, silent, dressed in bone, wrapped in cloaks of woven squirrel hide and seal gut. The Byamians did not bury their dead. They preserved them, displayed them like sentries, faces painted in red ochre, symbols etched into the cheeks. A rune of memory, a rune of watching, a rune for hunger. There was no rot, no smell of death, only cold and silence, the kind that seeped into marrow. Beyond the sanctuaries, they found the masks, hung from pine boughs like children's toys, some carved from bone, moose, seal, bear, others stitched from bark and sinew, the eyes blacked out with pitch, mouth sewn shut. One mask had a human tongue nailed beneath it. Askel vomited in the snow. They set no fire that night. The trees were too close, too tall. The sky above hung with the pale streaks of northern light, but it gave no warmth, just a greenish shimmer like sickness over water. Torgir stood guard, not because it was his turn, because he could not sleep, not after what he'd seen in the reflection of the water bucket, the face that was not his. The others muttered in their sleep. One man gurgled as if drowning. Another laughed, but the sound was wrong, too slow, too wet. Near midnight, a horn sounded in the distance, deep, hollow, not Viking, a Byamian signal. The men jerked upright. Some drew blades. One cried out, only to be muffled by Kettle's hand. They waited. The horn did not sound again. In the morning, footprints circled the camp. Small, light, each one faced inward, toward where they had slept. Then came the dancers. At dusk, through the snow mist, they saw them, figures moving between trees, bare-legged, bare-armed, but not shivering, covered in spirals of soot, dancing slowly, in silence. Torgir counted 7, then lost count, then saw more. They moved in spirals, not toward the Norsemen, around them, as if weaving the space tighter. Kettle dropped his axe. No voice had called, no blade had fallen, but it was war, just not the kind Vikings knew. 4. Female power as a cultural shock. At the front of the dancers stood a woman, not old, not young, dressed in a robe of stitched raven feathers and carved walrus tusk. Her hair was white, though her face was smooth. She wore no weapon, but she held a bone staff taller than herself, from which hung a ring of jaws: fox, otter, man. She stepped forward into the camp, alone. The men raised no weapons, could not. Something in her presence hollowed them. She did not speak Norse. She did not speak at all. She sang, a low tone, deep in the chest, like ice cracking under a lake. Torgeir could not breathe. The song made the air feel thick, like milk. He reached for his knife, but his hands moved slow, as if underwater. She walked past them, one by one, her eyes pale as fish belly. She stopped before Snorri's empty cloak, still draped over a tree. She touched it, then whispered something into the fur. The wind picked up, the fire guttered. And then she turned, raised her staff, and the dancers vanished. Not into the forest, just gone. Only she remained. And then she was gone too. The next morning, every man woke with blood under his fingernails and no memory of dreams. Askel's beard had been cut in his sleep. Each strand laid neatly beside him. Ketil's boots were on the wrong feet. Torgeir's left eye was swollen shut, but he'd been untouched. The old rites did not protect them. The runes they carved turned up blank in the morning. Snow had melted in their shapes. The gods were not watching here. Or perhaps they were. Just not their gods. Torgeir wrapped his hands in seal fur and bit his tongue to stay grounded. He began to speak to no one, or to someone who had not yet arrived. The men followed. Not him. The silence. Torgeir had stopped measuring time in days. He counted by signs now. Bones found upright in trees, eyes glimpsed through branches, moments when the air felt heavy with something else. Then light again. The forest led them. Not the stars, not maps, not instinct. Just a pull, like a hand inside his chest guiding his next step and the next. The snow had grown softer beneath their boots, but it was not melting. It breathed, settled, then shifted, then hardened again. Once, when Askel drove his spear into the ground to test the depth, he struck something hollow. Not stone, not wood. It gave like skin, then sighed, and the snow around it sank by a finger's breadth. He did not test again. The men had ceased speaking altogether. The Norse tongue was too sharp for this place. Even whispers felt like slashes in the air, attracting things not meant to hear human words. They had become monks of silence. Even their eyes seemed quieter, wider but dull, like those of fish beneath ice. That was when they reached the ridge. A line of stone, crusted in frost, jutted out from the trees like the spine of a dead thing. Carved into its face, a series of marks, runes, but not Norse. A spiraling language, looping and interwoven, as if it had grown rather than been etched. Torgeir reached toward them, then hesitated. The air near the stone was warm, faintly, against all logic. They stood before it for a long while. Then a cry came from behind the ridge. Not a scream, a wail, long, drawn, breaking like something ancient cracking open. The men climbed without orders. On the other side, a clearing. Inside it, death. 5. Ambush as sacred theater. At first, they saw only the remains. Warriors hung from pine trees like offerings, their bodies stripped of armor, arranged in a circle. Not mutilated. Arranged. Arms crossed. Eyes removed, but sockets filled with woven reeds and crushed berries. Red and black, like rot and shadow. In the center, a fire pit still smoldered, but no wood remained. Torgeir stepped into the ring. The air changed, not colder, closer, as if the space pressed inward to touch him. He crouched beside one of the bodies, a young man no older than 15. Bare chest painted with white spirals. rope burns on the wrists, no signs of struggle. The boy had accepted his death, or believed it necessary. Then, beneath the ash, Torgeir found something, a horn, carved from elk bone, marked with notches too precise for counting. Each was flanked by a scratch shaped like an eye. He raised it. The others watched. The trees did too. He did not blow it. That night, they slept without fire. Kettle heard the drums first, not drums of battle, no tempo, no signal. These were arrhythmic, breath-like, made not with skins, but hollow bone and snow-packed wood. The sound rose, then died, then returned stronger. It came from all sides. Then the smoke came. Not from their own camp, from the trees, thick, low, not acrid but sweet, like burning herbs or fermented birch sap. It did not sting the eyes. It filled the lungs slowly, gently, as if asking permission. The men staggered upright. One by one, they saw her again. The woman in the feathered robe. This time, she walked with others. 7 of them, all women, each dressed differently. Some in masks of bone, some naked but covered in ritual paint. One dragged a sled of fire, coals that did not smoke, laid in a bed of snow and pine needles that refused to burn. They walked around the men in a slow ring, not attacking, performing. Torgeir fell to his knees, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of recognition. This was not battle, not theater. This was ritual, older than war, older than gods. The women sang. A single note passed between mouths. The melody never broke, only deepened, multiplied. The note split like light through ice, echoing off trunks and bone and stone. Then the men began to see the traps. Not pitfalls, not snares, sound traps, shadow traps. They realized they had already walked into the kill. Somewhere behind them, the ring of hung corpses had collapsed inward. The trees had shifted. The snow had reshaped itself. They were inside a sacred geometry, and they did not understand its shape. Kettle lunged forward. A horn blew from nowhere, and something moved. Not a man, not a beast, a shape between. It leapt from the trees in silence. Just a gust, a blur, and Kettle was gone. No scream, only the clink of his blade hitting stone. Torgeir did not move. Neither did the women. One of them turned her head, and from behind her mask of carved fox bone whispered in Norse, "You are prey now," then vanished. The rest followed. So did the drums, and the men, those who remained, began to run. Not by choice, by instinct, and the snow swallowed their footprints. 6. Economic irony and mutual dependence. They stumbled into a valley, not deep, not open. A shallow bowl of snow-ringed rock, and in the center, tents, not Viking. Thin, high tents of stitched skins, colored with berry dyes, pinned with ivory stakes. Smoke rose from holes at the top. Around them, women and children moved slowly, unarmed. Cooking, grinding herbs, mending hides. It was a market. Torgeir stopped. The remaining Norsemen blinked, weapons half raised. One of the Byamian women looked up, met his eyes, then returned to stirring her pot. A man approached. Older, lean, dressed in a cloak of overlapping squirrel pelts. His eyes bore no fear. He gestured to a tent, then to a pile of goods beside it. Tusks, dried fish, carved antlers, seal fat, furs like none the Norse had ever touched. The old ways of trade. Torgeir stepped forward. His hands trembled. He offered the only thing he had, a pendant made of Baltic amber. The man nodded, took it, offered salt-dried meat in return. They exchanged, nothing more, no words. Then the man gestured, outward, to the snowline beyond the tents. Go. Torgeir did not question. He gathered what remained of his men, They moved past the tents in silence. Children watched. One woman wept, holding a Norseman's shield rim. She placed it in the fire. It did not burn. 7. Legacy of defiance. They did not speak on the return. The forest never truly let them go. Even the rivers had changed. Paths were unfamiliar. They walked for days without signs of life. When they reached the edge of the white forest, only 3 remained. Torgeir, Askell, now half mad, always humming, and Freyr, who never spoke again. They returned to their village gaunt and frostbitten, eyes hollowed like men who had lived through famine. They spoke no names, no boasts, no sagas. At night, the children heard them shiver even by the hearth. Some say Torgeir carved new runes by the fjord, simple marks, curling like snowdrift, not of Norse kind. He said they were wards. Others say he kept the Biamian horn beside his bed and never touched it. Years passed, and the stories grew. They called them the Watchers in the White Forest. They said if you heard drums with no rhythm, you should not answer. They said if you found prints that disappeared mid-step, you should turn back. And when the snow began to fall in spirals, the elders would say, "Do not bring fire. Do not speak names. Do not look back." But every winter someone did, and the white forest always remembered. The sea had not tasted salt for weeks. That was the first sign. Torgeir stood barefoot at the edge of the inlet, ankles half submerged in gray meltwater, and waited for his breath to come back. The fjord had thawed too early. A sheen of oily fog rolled low over the surface like seal fat skimmed from broth, quieting the world. He scooped water into his palm and sniffed it. Brackish. Not salt, not clean, just in between. He watched a gull circle once overhead and vanish into the low clouds. No cry, just wings. Behind him, the village still smoked. Not from fire, from rot. There had been sickness, dry cough, blood on the teeth, yellow tongues, but no one had died from it. Not exactly. They had gone missing, one by one, into the birchwood. Some barefoot, some clothed in festival robes, all of them walking calmly, as if following a known path. When the men tracked the footprints, they ended mid-stride. Always, as if the ground had stopped bothering to remember them. Torgeir spat into the surf and turned back. He no longer lived in the hall. He had built a hut on the edge of the cliff, out of driftwood and peat and sealskin. From its narrow door, he watched the snowline rise year by year, like the edge of a creeping breath about to cover everything. The others didn't visit anymore. They feared the forest. They feared him more. He still wore the horn at his belt, cracked elk bone, warm in summer, cold in flame. He had tried once to throw it into the sea. It had turned up in his bed the next morning, dry. He had not tried again. He still saw them sometimes, not in dreams, in reflections, in water, in the eye of a dying goat, in the sheen of seal oil on the rim of a bowl, the women, the feather-robed, the masked, the child whose rib had hummed when he held it. He had stopped asking if they were real. The Biamians did not need belief. They needed silence. But silence was not what came to his door that spring. It was a scream. Thin. Raw. Human. He left the cliff and climbed toward the longhouse. He had not walked the path in 3 seasons. His knees burned. The ground had shifted. Roots exposed, soil thinner. Where once had been heather, now only stone and blue moss. Halfway up, he passed the old prayer stump. The runes carved in its face had split, each now marked with a crossbar, as if crossed out by something illiterate but angry. At the ridge, the hall came into view. 3 torches blazed beside it. 2 horses, 1 prone figure, blood trailing in the snow. He drew his sayax from habit. Not for war, for honesty. A girl lay curled near the doorway. She could not have been more than 15. Her foot was wrapped in soaked linen, black with infection. Her dress was torn, not by battle, by speed. Her lips moved, no sound. He knelt beside her, pressed ear to her mouth. A word, over and over. Drums. Back to the forest. She had come from the Fiel Valley north of Skardabrekka. No one had lived there in 2 generations, not since the famine winter when a dozen men disappeared trying to find game and returned months later with no memory and the bones of children in their packs. But a family had returned there last year. 3 brothers, 1 wife, 2 sons. Trappers. They had not sent word in months. The girl, Ingrid, had been sent by her uncle to fetch meat. She found the camp cold. Not just abandoned. Cold. Snow in the hearth. Bowls laid out with dust in them. Bones placed carefully in beds. Dolls buried in snow with stone eyes. And she heard the sound. Not drums. Not really. Something like the sound of breath echoing inside a broken shell. And chanting. No words, just vowels drawn through bone. She ran. 3 days, no food, no sleep. Only the sound following her like steam on the back of her neck. Torgir carried her into the hall. The people watched from the shadows. No one moved to help. He lit the fire himself, dosed her wound with chewed juniper and goat's fat, fed her by hand. She slept, and did not wake. The next night, the torches by the hall went out one by one. He did not light them again. Into the white once more. Torgir did not ask for volunteers. He knew who would come. Askell, still singing to himself, now bent-backed, fingers always twitching like he was weaving things only he could see. Torhild, the healer widow, who had once dreamt of white birds burying her husband's hands in the marsh. And Eric, the thrall's son, born with 6 toes, whom the others said could smell lies. They left before dawn. No dogs, no iron. Only snowshoes, rope, salt, ash, and the old horn. They followed no trail, only cold places, where moss shriveled, where wind held its breath, where birds flew wide circles around a glade for no reason. By the 3rd day, Askell began to draw, with his finger, in snow, in air, circles, crosses, spirals. He did not explain. Eric hummed back at the wind. Sometimes, it answered. Torhild brewed tea from red roots that bled into the water. She called it womb water. Said it kept the forest from remembering your father's sins. Torgeir didn't drink. He carried the horn. It grew heavier with each hour. The trees narrowed, and then opened. The valley, exactly as Ingrid described. Not snow-covered, snow-shaped, huts molded from crusted drift, domed like eggshells. No smoke, no tracks, not empty, waiting. In the center, a pole. A tree stripped to its skeleton, ribs of bark peeled outward like fingers. From its peak hung a mask, bone, fox-faced, painted red. Not Biamian, Viking. He climbed alone. At the top, nailed to the tree's heart, was a pouch. He opened it. Inside, 7 small stones, warm. One was shaped like a rune. One pulsed, one bled, one turned to dust in his palm. One vanished when touched, one whispered, one stared. He closed the pouch. The snow behind him cracked, not from weight, from sound. He turned. The valley had filled. Figures stood between the huts. Silent, masked, small, children? No, short, wrapped in furs and sinew, painted faces. They raised no weapons, only arms, in welcome. The marketplace returns. Torgeir walked first. Askell followed. Torhild burned herbs in a shell and scattered it as she moved. Eric closed his eyes. They reached the center. The figures made way. At the base of the pole, a fire. Lit. Clean. Smoke rose straight. From the left, A woman approached, not feather-robed, bare-headed, scarred. Her eyes were milky, not blind, beyond sight. She spoke, not in Norse, not in Sami, in something older. Torgeir understood. She pointed at the pouch. He handed it over. She opened it, took the stones, crushed them to powder, blew the dust into the fire. It flared green. Then she reached for the horn. Torgeir held it a moment longer, then released. She placed it in the fire. It did not burn. It hummed. The hum became chant. The chant became a wall of sound. The Bohemians gathered, not hostile. Ritual. Torhild knelt. Askel wept. Eirik bled from his ears and smiled. The snow turned to steam, and the forest breathed out. Legacy rewritten. They stayed for 7 nights, or perhaps only 1. They left with no memory of return, only a mark on the soles of their feet, spiral, etched in ash. Back in the village, Ingrid woke, eyes pale as new ice, and when she spoke, her voice came in layers. Many. None of them hers. She looked at Torgeir, smiled. Now we remember you. Then slept. Forever. The white forest grew that year. No crops grew near it, but none dared cut it back. The old ones built stone rings at the edge. The young listened to snow. And sometimes, in the northern wind, when all was still, the horns blew once more. But from the inside out, by the time the river thawed the 3rd time that year, no one in the village planted barley. Not from laziness, not from hunger, from knowing. The earth no longer took the seed. It turned it in the soil like an old tooth in the mouth of a corpse. Rain fell crooked. Bees hummed slower, as if the air had thickened to the consistency of blood. Men sharpened scythes they would not swing. Women swept doorways that no longer kept out dust. The oldest said nothing. Their tongues had gone dry. The youngest whispered only in riddles. And the middle generation, those who remembered the raids and the fire and the feasting, they simply began to vanish. No one called it a curse. It was older than that. It was what happens when you speak the wrong name to the wrong forest. Torgeir no longer walked among them. He lived now inside the standing stone above the ridge, where the lichen grew in circular bands and the wind sang hollow even when still. The villagers left him meat, salt, a cup of blood, a comb of moss. They never waited for thanks. He had not aged, nor had he grown. He had simply settled, like sediment, layer by layer, silence by silence, until the man became part of the stone, and the stone became part of a path no one followed. But stories followed him. Children asked why he never died. Mothers told them he had died once, but the forest had refused him. Elders claimed he had married the white tree of the Watchers, and now she bore only snow. Still, others said he was a war gift, an offering too costly to keep, too dangerous to discard. And every year on the same moon, the ash moon, they heard it. The hum. Long, hollow, rising from ice, not from throat. From memory, the sound of a culture that did not need swords to kill. The sound of a people who survived not by fighting, but by being forgotten. But there were still those who remembered, and those who came seeking. Legacy meets iron. They arrived on boats, not Norse, not Saxon. Something newer, shallower, wide-bodied. Their prows were carved with lion heads instead of dragons. They carried salt iron blades and wrapped their horses' hooves in leather to muffle the sound of conquest. Traders first, they brought beads, grain, soap, and lies. They asked about the northern road. The villagers said nothing, so they offered silver, then threat, then fire. 3 huts burned. 1 boy was taken. They asked again, what lies beyond the white trees? This time, the people pointed, not to the trail, to the sky, to where the clouds spun counter to the wind. The men laughed, then packed. They left the next dawn. 13 in number. Horses, dogs, one man of letters with a quill made of swan bone. They rode into the birch. They were never seen again. But one horse returned. Its eyes had been sewn shut, its hooves wrapped in moss. It would not eat. It would not drink. It waited for 7 nights, then walked backward into the fjord and drowned standing up. The villagers told no one. No messengers were sent. No songs were sung. But a ring of black stones appeared at the forest's edge the next morning. Inside it, a mask, fox-faced, carved with Norse runes, painted with southern ink. And behind the mask, the man of letters' tongue, still curled in the shape of a vowel. Saga fragment. And the white ones gave no name to themselves, but were named in the silence between steps. They drank no mead, sang no verse, built no halls. But they endured. Where the brave fell, they vanished. Where the strong ruled, they circled. And where the gods watched, they slept. The final habit, to leave no echo. Torgir knew it now, the last of the 7. The habit the Biamians never taught, only showed. To pass through the world without echo. Not invisibility, not cowardice, but a mastery of presence so precise it leaves no trace, not even in memory. Their raids were breath. Their vengeance was sleep. Their traps were not built. They were invited. And when they struck, the wound healed around them. No scar, no saga, only the snow, remembering where blood had once melted it. That was why no war party had ever returned. Because the Biamians did not fight. They unremembered, and that was why Torgir had remained. He was the anchor, the stone the stream split around. He could not leave. He could not die. He could only remember, because someone had to remember them. And now, the forest was rising again. He felt it in the way the air thickened each morning, the way the birds flew lower and faster. He saw it in the children's eyes, how they stared longer at fog than at faces. He heard it in the groan of the village gates, how the hinges whined in tones that once echoed from carved bones in the watcher's hand. It was not over. The white was coming again, not to kill, to teach, to remind the iron-wielding men of a law older than conquest. If you forget the forest will not forget you. Winter without season. That year, summer did not come. Cattle miscarried. Ravens nested in wells. Men dreamt of being carved open and found hollow. The Biamians were not seen. They were felt. A chill when your child said a word you didn't teach them. A tune hummed by no mouth. A footprint made by no soul. And the forest grew, but differently. It grew into thought, into ritual, into the way people salted meat. The way they left one bowl of broth untouched each meal. The way they never said their own names at night. The Biamians had not been defeated. They had become the habits. The Norse now fought wars they no longer started, defended homes they no longer built, bowed to gods who had become whispers in the woods. And every so often, when the mist spiraled downward instead of up, the villagers would find a horn on their doorstep. Still warm, still humming, and they knew, the watchers remembered, and so must they. Final fragment, inscription from the runestone at Skogfjell Ridge. We did not win, we did not lose. We walked into the forest and left nothing behind, except you, and you remember. That is enough. For now. The first frost of summer fell on the lambs. They found them in the upper pasture, legs stiff, eyes glazed with the sheen of sleep not finished. No marks, no struggle, just small curled bodies pressed into the earth as if listening for something below. Their mothers stood still, not mourning, not lowing, just watching the tree line. The village did not weep. This was not grief. This was recognition. By the end of that week, the wells turned cloudy, not poisoned, not spoiled, just mute. No reflection showed in the water. Even the moon refused to shimmer. Torgir did not come down from the stone. He watched the ridge smoke. He watched the people stop speaking. And still he waited, not for sign, for return. He felt it first in the marrow, like a knot forming in the rope of the world. That night, the aurora came early, green veils above the roofs, too low, moving against the wind, and under them, voices, not loud, not words, but syllables formed from breath and earth and the slow creak of sap rising. He slept beneath the stone. His dreams were not his. They walked him back to the clearing, the old circle, the masks, the pole with the 7 tongues. But the forest was different now. Not trees, columns, not roots, veins. He did not see the Biamians. He saw the world as they saw it, not as prey and predator, not as man and God, but as pattern. Every death a hinge, every silence a gate, every choice a root system branching into unseen futures. And in the center, nothing. Not void, not chaos, just a space left intentionally blank. He awoke with blood on his lips and birch bark in his fist, and a whisper behind his left ear. Now it's your turn. In the southern village, where riverboats brought amber and linen, a child named Auda began to sing in her sleep. Each night, the tune changed. But each morning, the walls of her home were marked with soot in the shape of spirals and moons and eyes. Her father beat her once. The next night, he was found standing in the river up to his neck, smiling. Dead. Auda kept singing. A wandering monk wrote the symbols into his book. He fell ill before crossing the fjord and burned his journal himself. The smoke curled downward. In the east, a goat gave birth to something with a human hand. The midwife buried it in peat without speaking. The snow that year came black at first, then bled into white by morning. The Biamians were not returning. They were emerging. Through dream, through ritual, through the habits left behind in people who no longer remembered planting them. Old women muttered phrases in unknown tongues as they spun wool they couldn't name. Young men carved the wrong names into their shields and forgot to carry them into battle. And the stone circles at the edge of every field grew moss that bloomed in patterns never seen before. It was not an invasion. It was a quiet reclamation. The Norse had once thought themselves wolves, but the forest had never been prey. And now it walked through them again. Torgir stood at the fjord's edge one morning and saw the fog move in 2 directions at once. He walked to the waterline and stepped in. The waves did not part. They accepted him. He walked until his knees vanished, then his hips, then his chest. When the water reached his mouth, he did not hold his breath. He let it enter. The sea did not drown him. It taught him. In the dark, he heard the drums again. But now he heard the rests between them, the places where memory could breathe. When he rose from the water hours later, his eyes were white, not blind, remembering. He returned to the village and laid a piece of bark on the hearth. No one touched it. 3 days later, the chief's wife took it and disappeared. Her tracks led into the trees. They did not return. But her laughter echoed near the fields for weeks after. The 7th horn had returned. This time, it arrived in a basket of reeds, placed on the longhouse roof by hands unseen. The children were the first to climb and fetch it. They blew it, not out of ceremony, out of joy. The sound was not a call, it was a key. and it opened something in the bones of everyone who heard it. They remembered nothing specific, but the fear left their blood. The snow that night melted just enough to reveal an old carving beneath the village altar. A spiral, with a dot at the center. The village smith traced it with his thumb, wept, and walked north without boots. No one stopped him. There were no longer names for what was happening. No longer wars, no longer rights, only corrections. The Byamians did not return to reclaim land. They returned to reassert rhythm, to bend time back to its root, to remind the wind which direction to blow, to remind the Norse what silence could teach that steel could not. Some resisted. They lit fires, burned trees, tried to carve the forest into planks. Each one died, not from blade, from forgetting. Their eyes glazed, they wandered, and the forest left no echo. One night, the aurora formed into 7 lines, parallel and straight. Each ended in a curve, like a rib or a track. The people gathered in the clearing, unbidden. They sang, not with words, with memory. Each person found their own pitch, their own beat. The sound rose, discordant, terrifying, and then resolved into one single hum. Torgir stood at the center, eyes closed, hands lifted. The horn lay at his feet. He did not lift it. He listened. And in the space between breaths, the last habit settled into him. Not to conquer, not to flee, not to forget, but to become the silence itself. And through that silence, remain.